My husband Garrett leaned against the kitchen counter, his face twisted with disgust. "You dull old hag, I want a divorce," he screamed on what was supposed to be my 40th birthday celebration. I quietly reached into my purse and pulled out a manila folder I'd been carrying for months. "Consider it done, darling," I said calmly. He had no idea that by tomorrow morning, he'd be sleeping in his car. Hold up, I'm curious where you're listening from. And if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. The silence that followed his cruel words was deafening. Our three children, Lily, age 16, Noah, 14, and little Emma, 8, stood frozen in the dining room doorway, birthday cake forgotten, watching their father destroy their mother on what should have been a joyful day. The dining room was still decorated with the streamers they'd hung that morning, the Happy Birthday Mom banner now mocking us all with its cheerful pink letters. Garrett's chest was heaving with rage, his expensive silk tie crooked from his dramatic outburst. Behind him, the kitchen window revealed the sprawling grounds of our estate in Willowbrook Heights, the manicured gardens and three-car garage housing his precious Porsche, BMW, and vintage Mustang. All of it would be mine by sunset tomorrow, though Garrett didn't know it yet. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories about standing up to narcissistic abuse and taking control of your own destiny. If you believe that loyalty and love deserve respect, not cruelty, please consider subscribing. It helps us reach more women facing similar challenges in toxic relationships. Now, let's see how this revenge unfolds. But let me back up to where this nightmare really began. Not today, not even last month when Garrett started staying out until 3 a.m., claiming business meetings. This started 18 years ago when I walked down the aisle of St. Catherine's Cathedral in my grandmother's pearl-beaded gown, believing I was marrying my soulmate. I was 22, fresh from law school at Ridgemont University, with dreams of changing the world through family advocacy. Garrett was 28, charming, successful, running his father's construction empire, Blackstone Development. He promised me partnership, adventure, a life where we'd build something beautiful together. I believed him because I was young enough to think love conquered everything, naive enough to trust completely. Those early years in our first apartment on Maple Street were intoxicating. Garrett would bring me flowers every Friday, surprise me with weekend trips to Seaside Cove, and talk for hours about our future children and the house we'd build together. When he landed the Morrison County Hospital contract, tripling his company's revenue, I celebrated his success like it was my own achievement. When the Riverside Shopping Plaza project made him a millionaire by 30, I threw him the party of the century, inviting everyone who mattered in Willowbrook's business community. I believed we were a team, partners building an empire together. I sacrificed my legal career to support his ambitions, handling his business correspondence, managing client relationships, organizing the social events that secured his most lucrative contracts. When Lily was born, I put my law license on hold to be the perfect wife and mother Garrett demanded. When Noah arrived 2 years later, I convinced myself that raising successful children was more important than courtroom victories. By the time Emma was born 6 years ago, I'd been out of legal practice for over a decade, completely dependent on Garrett's generosity for everything from grocery money to my children's school fees. The Willowbrook Heights mansion came when Garrett secured the government contract for the new Civic Center. 8,000 square feet of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Crescent Lake. The house was Garrett's trophy, proof of his success, and I was expected to maintain it perfectly while he entertained clients and city officials in style. I threw myself into being the ideal executive wife, hosting dinner parties that secured Garrett's biggest deals, organizing charity galas that enhanced his reputation, managing household staff that kept everything running smoothly while he focused on business. Each success felt like our mutual victory until I realized Garrett saw my contributions as expected services rather than valuable partnerships. The first crack appeared 3 years ago, During the Thanksgiving dinner I'd spent weeks planning for Garrett's most important clients, after everyone praised the evening's perfection, Garrett announced to our guests, "Lorraine has so much time on her hands, she can really focus on these details. Not everyone can afford a wife who doesn't work." The comment stung because it dismissed 18 years of sacrifice as laziness rather than dedication. I'd given up my legal career, my independence, my identity to support Garrett's ambitions, and he described my life like it was an indulgent hobby funded by his hard work. That night, lying in our king-sized bed while Garrett snored beside me, I started questioning everything. When had I stopped being his partner and become his employee? When had my opinions stopped mattering in decisions about our life together? When had I become so small that my husband could mock me publicly without consequences?
The answer was gradual, like water wearing away stone. Each year, Garrett had taken more control while giving me less respect. He'd moved our banking to accounts I couldn't access, claiming it was more efficient. He'd started making major decisions without consulting me, saying I didn't understand business complexities. He'd begun treating me like staff in my own home, issuing orders about dinner plans and social schedules like I was his personal assistant. Last year, the disrespect became open cruelty. Garrett started criticizing my appearance, my intelligence, my worth as a partner. He'd make jokes about trading up when talking with his business associates, laughing like it was harmless teasing, while I smiled and pretended it didn't hurt. The affair started 6 months ago. Though Garrett thought he was being subtle, late nights became routine. Business trips lasted longer than necessary, and his phone became permanently password protected. When I found the credit card charges for romantic dinners I'd never attended and hotel rooms I'd never seen, I realized Garrett wasn't just emotionally done with our marriage, he was actively replacing me. But what Garrett didn't know was that I'd never actually let my law license expire. What he didn't realize was that I'd been quietly consulting for Riverside Legal Aid for the past 2 years, handling pro bono cases that kept my skills sharp. What he couldn't imagine was that I'd been documenting everything. Every financial transaction, every business decision, every asset acquisition, in preparation for exactly this moment. The manila folder I'd pulled from my purse contained divorce papers I'd filed that morning, along with restraining orders, asset freezes, and fraud investigations that would dismantle Garrett's life piece by piece. While he was screaming insults at me in our kitchen, court officers were already en route to seize his business accounts and change the locks on properties he thought he controlled. My husband thought he'd married a helpless housewife who would beg for mercy when he decided to discard her. Instead, he'd spent 18 years living with a brilliant attorney who'd been gathering evidence for the most devastating legal warfare of his career. Tomorrow, Garrett would discover that underestimating your opponent is the most expensive mistake you can make. The woman he'd called a dull old hag was about to teach him that intelligence and patience always triumph over arrogance and cruelty, and I was going to enjoy every single moment of his complete destruction. The birthday cake sat untouched on our dining room table, its 40 candles slowly melting into colorful wax pools while Garrett continued his tirade. "Look at yourself, Lorraine. Gray hair, wrinkles, that frumpy dress. You think any man would want this?" He gestured dismissively at my entire existence, his voice growing louder with each cruel word. My children had fled upstairs after his initial explosion, their footsteps thundering on the marble staircase as they escaped to their rooms. I could hear Emma crying through her bedroom door, probably wondering why Daddy was being so mean to Mommy on her special day. The sound of my daughter's tears was the moment everything inside me crystallized into pure, cold determination. For 18 years, I'd absorbed Garrett's criticism like a sponge, believing that loving wives endured their husbands' moods, that successful marriages required sacrifice and patience. I'd convinced myself that Garrett's stress from work was temporary, that his increasing cruelty was just him struggling with midlife pressures, that our marriage could survive anything if I just tried harder to be the woman he wanted. But hearing my 8-year-old daughter sobbing because she'd witnessed her father destroy her mother's dignity was the breaking point I didn't know I'd been approaching. Emma's innocence was collateral damage in Garrett's war against my self-worth, and that was unforgivable. That was the moment I stopped being his victim and became his worst nightmare. "You're absolutely right, Garrett," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "This marriage is over." I opened the manila folder and began laying documents across our granite countertop with methodical precision. The first document was a petition for dissolution of marriage citing irreconcilable differences and requesting sole custody of our 3 minor children. The second was a temporary restraining order preventing Garrett from disposing of any marital assets pending court review. The third was an emergency motion for exclusive use of the family home, effective immediately upon service. But the fourth document made Garrett's face go completely white. A formal complaint filed with the Morrison County District Attorney's Office alleging fraudulent misrepresentation of income on tax returns, specifically related to the $2.3 million in cash payments Garrett had received from the Riverside Shopping Plaza project over the past 3 years. "This is impossible," Garrett whispered, his hands shaking as he flipped through pages of evidence I'd compiled over months of careful investigation. Bank records showing cash deposits that didn't match reported income, construction invoices that had been altered after client payment, tax returns that deliberately understated our family's true financial position.
"You've been skimming money from every major project for 3 years," I continued, my voice still eerily calm. "Telling me we couldn't afford Emma's private tutoring while hiding $800,000 in an account I wasn't supposed to know about, claiming business was slow while secretly purchasing investment properties in your brother's name?" Garrett's eyes darted toward his phone, probably calculating how quickly he could call his attorney. But I was 3 steps ahead of him, as I'd been for months. "Charles Morrison won't be returning your calls," I said, referring to his longtime lawyer. "I had a very interesting conversation with him yesterday about conflict of interest issues. Specifically, how he can't represent you in divorce proceedings when he's been helping you hide assets from your wife for 3 years. The State Bar Association was quite interested in that ethical violation." The color drained from Garrett's face as he realized the scope of what I had uncovered. His attorney wasn't just compromised, he was under investigation for helping clients commit tax fraud. Everything Garrett had built his security on was crumbling simultaneously. "Lorraine, listen to me," Garrett said, his voice shifting from anger to desperate negotiation. "We can work this out. I know I've been stressed lately, said things I didn't mean. We don't need lawyers in courts. We can handle this privately, keep it civil for the children's sake." But I was just getting started. From the folder, I pulled out a thick stack of photographs and printed emails that documented the real reason for Garrett's recent behavior. Hotel receipts showing romantic weekend getaways with his secretary, Amber Caldwell, credit card charges for jewelry I'd never received, text message printouts planning meetings at the Crescent Lake Resort while he told me he was visiting construction sites. "Your relationship with Amber has been going on for 8 months," I said, spreading the evidence across our kitchen island like playing cards. "The same Amber who's been handling Blackstone Development's payroll and has access to all your financial records? The same Amber who doesn't know that adultery affects asset division in Morrison County divorce proceedings?" Garrett's jaw dropped as he stared at pictures of himself and Amber kissing outside the Riverside Country Club, images I'd taken from my car while following them on one of his supposed business dinners. When did you? "I'm an attorney, Garrett. Did you forget?" I opened my laptop, which had been charging on the kitchen counter, and showed him the correspondence I'd been maintaining with Riverside Legal Aid. "I've been working pro bono cases for 2 years, keeping my legal skills sharp, while you thought I was just playing house." The laptop screen displayed my active cases. 3 domestic violence victims I'd helped escape abusive marriages, 2 women who'd successfully sued employers for discrimination, and 1 high-profile case where I'd helped a wife recover $4.2 million in assets her husband had hidden offshore. My reputation in the legal community was stronger than it had ever been, even during my full-time practice. The private investigator I hired has been documenting your activities for 6 months. Every affair, every financial transaction, every lie you've told. Judge Patricia Hendricks, who'll be handling our case, takes a very dim view of husbands who hide assets and commit adultery while their wives sacrifice careers to raise their children. Garrett slumped against the counter, finally understanding that he wasn't dealing with the helpless housewife he'd been psychologically abusing for years. He was facing a highly skilled attorney who'd been building an airtight case while he'd been too arrogant to notice the trap closing around him. "What do you want?" Garrett asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Justice. And for you to learn that actions have consequences." My phone buzzed with a text message from the process server I'd hired. Garrett's business accounts had been frozen as of 4:30 p.m. His access to company credit cards was terminated. The locks on his office at Blackstone Development had been changed, and security had been instructed to treat him as a trespasser if he tried to enter the building. "Your brother Kevin called an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. Apparently, the IRS contacted Blackstone Development this afternoon asking questions about unreported income. Kevin is quite upset about potential criminal liability affecting the family business." Garrett's phone rang, and I could see Kevin's name on the caller ID. Garrett's hand trembled as he answered, his voice cracking as he tried to explain a situation he didn't fully understand yet. "Kevin, there's been some kind of mistake. No, I didn't know about any IRS investigation. What do you mean the accounts are frozen?" Garrett's side of the conversation became increasingly desperate as his brother explained the legal tsunami that had hit their family business in the past 6 hours. After ending the call, Garrett looked at me with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. "You did all this in one day?" "I did all this over 8 months, I corrected. "Today was just when I decided to press the button and watch your life explode. The dull old hag you've been insulting has been systematically dismantling your entire existence while you are too busy cheating and stealing to notice the trap closing around you." The front doorbell rang, and through the window, I could see 2 Morrison County Sheriff's deputies standing on our porch. The final pieces of my strategy were falling into place exactly as I'd planned. "Those officers are here to serve you with official notification that you have 2 hours to pack personal belongings and vacate this house," I said, watching Garrett's face as the reality of his situation finally sank in completely. "The temporary restraining order gives me exclusive use of the family home pending divorce proceedings." Garrett stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. The woman he'd married wasn't gone. She'd just been planning his destruction with the patience and precision of someone who understood that revenge is a dish best served with proper legal documentation. "You can't do this to me," Garrett said, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew exactly how thoroughly I could and would destroy him. Tomorrow morning, Garrett would wake up homeless, bankrupt, and facing federal tax evasion charges. And it would only be the beginning of consequences that would unfold over months as I systematically reclaimed everything he'd stolen from me over 18 years of psychological abuse. The scared, submissive wife was gone forever. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, a brilliant attorney with 18 years of stored rage and the legal expertise to channel it into perfect justice. The next morning, I watched from my bedroom window as Garrett loaded his belongings into the back of his Porsche, his movements sharp and angry. The deputies had given him exactly 2 hours the night before to pack essentials, and he'd spent most of that time on frantic phone calls trying to reach attorneys who wouldn't take his case. Now, at 8 a.m., he was officially homeless, though he didn't know the worst was yet to come. My phone rang as Garrett's car disappeared down Crescent Lake Drive. "Mrs. Blackwood?" The voice belonged to Detective Sarah Martinez from the Morrison County Financial Crimes Unit. "We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss your husband's tax situation. Your evidence package was very thorough." "I'm available this afternoon," I replied, sipping coffee from my favorite mug while watching the sunrise over the lake. For the first time in years, the morning felt peaceful instead of anxious.
No walking on eggshells around Garrett's mood. No pretending to be grateful for scraps of affection. Just quiet satisfaction knowing that justice was finally in motion. The children came downstairs one by one, their faces uncertain as they processed the previous night's drama. Emma still looked confused, clutching her stuffed rabbit and asking why Daddy had yelled so much. Lily and Noah were old enough to understand more, but young enough to need reassurance that their world wasn't completely collapsing. "Mom, is Dad really not coming back?" Noah asked, pouring cereal into his bowl with deliberate concentration. "Your father made choices that hurt our family," I said carefully. "But you'll still see him regularly, and this house will always be your safe place. Nothing that happened between your father and me changes how much I love you." Lily looked up from her phone where she'd been reading news articles about Blackstone Development's sudden financial troubles. "The whole school is talking about it. Dad's company's all over social media. Something about tax problems and frozen bank accounts?" I'd anticipated this conversation. Garrett's public downfall would affect our children's social lives, their friendships, their sense of security. But protecting them meant being honest about their father's character, while not destroying their relationship with him entirely. "Your father made some poor business decisions that he'll have to answer for legally," I explained. "That's between him and the courts. What matters is that we're going to be fine, and you can still love your dad while understanding that adults face consequences for their choices." After dropping the children at school, I drove to my first appointment at Riverside Legal Aid, where I'd been quietly rebuilding my legal career while Garrett assumed I was just volunteering. The office buzzed with activity as paralegals prepared cases and attorneys reviewed client files. This was where I'd remembered who I was beneath 18 years of psychological abuse. "Lorraine," Janet Winters greeted me with a warm hug. "I saw the news about your husband's company. How are you holding up?" "Better than expected," I said honestly. "Actually, I wanted to discuss transitioning from volunteer to full-time staff attorney. My situation has changed, and I'm ready to practice law again." Janet's smile widened. "We've been hoping you'd say that. Your work on the Riverside domestic violence case was brilliant. The way you secured that $3.2 million settlement for Mrs. Chen was exactly the kind of expertise our clients need." Within 2 hours, I had a formal job offer as senior family law attorney at Riverside Legal Aid, with a starting salary that would support my children comfortably without Garrett's income. The irony was perfect. While Garrett faced financial ruin, I was launching the legal career I'd sacrificed to support his ambitions. My afternoon meeting with Detective Martinez revealed just how devastating my evidence would be to Garrett's future. The Financial Crimes Unit had spent the morning reviewing bank records, tax returns, and contracts I'd provided. The scope of Garrett's tax evasion was larger than I had initially calculated.
"Mrs. Blackwood, your documentation is exceptional," Detective Martinez said, spreading photos and financial records across the conference table. "Most spouses don't have access to this level of detail about their husband's business activities. How did you gather all this information?" 18 years of handling Garrett's correspondence, managing his social calendar, and having access to his home office, I explained. He treated me like invisible staff, so he was careless about confidential documents. I started photographing everything after I noticed discrepancies between what he told me about our finances and what I saw in his papers. The detective nodded approvingly. "The IRS is very interested in the Riverside Shopping Plaza payments. $2.3 million in unreported income over 3 years constitutes serious federal tax evasion. Combined with the fraudulent loan applications you documented, your husband could face 15 to 20 years in federal prison." Prison. The word sent a chill through me, despite my anger toward Garrett. I had wanted justice, consequences for his cruelty, but the reality of potentially sending my children's father to prison felt heavier than I'd anticipated. "What happens next?" I asked. "We'll coordinate with federal authorities for the criminal investigation while your divorce proceedings handle the civil matters. The beauty of your approach is that everything reinforces everything else. The criminal charges strengthen your position in divorce court, and the divorce evidence supports the federal case." That evening, I met with Rebecca Chen, the attorney who'd agreed to represent me in the divorce proceedings.
Rebecca had a reputation for aggressive advocacy in high-asset divorces, particularly cases involving hidden assets and financial fraud. Her office overlooked downtown Morrison, and through the windows I could see the civic center Garrett's company had built, the project that had made him wealthy enough to believe he was untouchable. "Lorraine, I've reviewed your evidence, and this is one of the most comprehensive cases I've seen," Rebecca said, organizing my documents into color-coded files. "Your husband didn't just commit adultery and tax evasion, he systematically defrauded the marital estate while psychologically abusing you for years." "What can we realistically expect?" I asked. Rebecca smiled grimly. "In Morrison County, adultery affects asset division. Combined with his financial crimes, you're looking at 70–80% of marital assets, full custody of the children, substantial alimony, and possibly punitive damages for emotional distress. Your husband's affair with his employee also opens him to sexual harassment lawsuits that could destroy what's left of his business." The next morning brought news that Garrett's situation was deteriorating faster than even I'd anticipated. Kevin called me personally, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Lorraine, I need to ask you something directly. Did you know about Garrett's tax problems when you filed for divorce?" "I suspected financial irregularities," I said carefully. "Why?" "The IRS raided our offices this morning. They seized every computer, every file cabinet, every piece of financial documentation going back 5 years. Our accountant quit, 3 major clients have canceled contracts, and our bonding company is threatening to drop us." Kevin's voice cracked slightly. "Blackstone Development might not survive this. 4 generations of family business could be destroyed because my brother decided to cheat on his taxes and his wife simultaneously." I felt a moment of genuine sympathy for Kevin, who'd always treated me respectfully and didn't deserve to suffer for Garrett's crimes. But Garrett had made these choices knowing they could destroy his family's legacy business. My documentation had simply revealed crimes that were always going to surface eventually. "I'm sorry this is affecting you, Kevin. Garrett's decisions were his own." "I know," Kevin said quietly. I never imagined he was capable of this level of deception. Stealing from his own family, lying to everyone who trusted him. Is there any way to work this out privately? Keep the criminal charges from destroying everything our grandfather built?" "That's between Garrett and federal prosecutors now. I can't control what happens with the criminal investigation." After hanging up, I felt the full weight of what I'd set in motion. Garrett's downfall wasn't just affecting him. It was rippling through his family, his employees, his business partners. Dozens of people who'd done nothing wrong were losing jobs and contracts because of evidence I'd provided to law enforcement. But then I remembered Emma crying in her bedroom when Garrett screamed insults at me on my birthday. I remembered 18 years of diminished self-worth, stolen credit for my contributions, and systematic psychological abuse designed to keep me dependent and submissive. I remembered Garrett stealing money from our family while telling me we couldn't afford Emma's tutoring or Noah's summer camp. Justice sometimes creates collateral damage, but that didn't make it wrong. Garrett had choices at every step. He could have been faithful, honest, respectful. Instead, he chose cruelty, fraud, and betrayal. The consequences flowing from those choices weren't my responsibility. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is all your fault. You've destroyed everything. I hope you're happy." Garrett was learning that actions have consequences, but he wasn't still accepting responsibility for the choices that created those consequences. He was blaming me for revealing his crimes instead of regretting committing them in the first place. I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Rebecca Chen. Harassment of opposing parties during divorce proceedings could result in additional sanctions, and I was documenting everything just as thoroughly as I had during my evidence-gathering phase.
By week's end, local news outlets were covering Blackstone Development's financial crimes investigation. Garrett's mugshot from his arrest on federal tax evasion charges appeared on the front page of the Morrison County Herald, alongside headlines about corruption in local construction contracts. The man who'd called me a dull old hag
was now infamous throughout our community as a tax cheat and adulterer who destroyed a family business through greed and dishonesty. His reputation was in ruins, his freedom was in jeopardy, and his family had turned their backs on him. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my legal career, providing stability for my children, and discovering who I was when I wasn't constantly managing someone else's emotional abuse. The preparation phase was complete. Now came the systematic dismantling of everything Garrett had built through 18 years of taking credit for my work and contributions, and I was just getting started. 3 weeks after Garrett's arrest, the divorce hearing that would determine our family's future took place in Morrison County Family Court. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:30 a.m. wearing my best navy suit, the one I'd purchased for my first day at Riverside Legal Aid. Beside me, Rebecca Chen carried 3 banker's boxes full of evidence that would systematically dismantle every lie Garrett had told over 18 years of marriage. Garrett sat at the opposite table with his new attorney, Marcus Webb, a criminal defense lawyer who specialized in white-collar crime rather than family law. Webb had taken the case because no reputable divorce attorney would represent someone facing federal charges for tax evasion and financial fraud. Garrett looked haggard, his usually perfect hair disheveled, wearing a suit that had seen better days. The confident businessman who'd screamed at me 3 weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood his entire world was collapsing. Judge Patricia Hendricks entered the courtroom with the no-nonsense bearing that had made her famous for fair but tough rulings in high-asset divorce cases. She'd reviewed our evidence packages in advance, and her expression suggested she'd formed strong opinions about Garrett's character before we'd even begun. This case involves allegations of adultery, financial fraud, and systematic concealment of marital assets, Judge Hendricks announced, looking directly at Garrett. Mr. Blackwood, you're currently under federal indictment for tax evasion. How do you plead to the charges in your wife's divorce petition? Garrett's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear before Garrett stood. Your Honor, I contest the characterization of my business activities as fraudulent. There may have been accounting errors, but Mr. Blackwood, this court has reviewed rank records showing $2.3 million in unreported income over 3 years. Those aren't accounting errors. They're deliberate attempts to evade taxation while hiding assets from your spouse. Rebecca stood to present our case, beginning with the financial evidence that painted Garrett as a systematic liar and thief. Your Honor, Mr. Blackwood told his wife they couldn't afford their daughter's private tutoring while secretly maintaining accounts containing over $800,000 in hidden funds. He claimed business difficulties to justify reducing household spending while purchasing investment properties under his brother's name. The financial exhibits Rebecca presented were devastating. Bank statements showing Garrett's secret accounts, property deeds revealing real estate purchases I'd never known about, investment portfolios worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that Garrett had accumulated using money he'd claimed was needed for business expenses. Mrs. Blackwood, Judge Hendricks said, turning to me, how did you discover these financial irregularities? Your Honor, I handled much of my husband's correspondence and paperwork during our marriage. Over time, I noticed discrepancies between what he told me about our financial situation and what I saw in documents crossing his desk. When his behavior became increasingly hostile, I began documenting everything systematically. Judge Hendricks nodded approvingly. And you maintained your legal license throughout your marriage? Yes, Your Honor. I worked pro bono cases through Riverside Legal Aid to keep my skills current. My husband believed I was simply volunteering, but I was actually rebuilding my legal career while managing household responsibilities. The adultery evidence came next, and this is where Garrett's composure completely cracked. Rebecca presented photographs, hotel receipts, and text messages documenting his 8-month affair with Amber Caldwell. The images were intimate enough to be embarrassing, but not explicit. Garrett and Amber holding hands at restaurants, kissing in his office, entering hotel rooms together during supposed business trips. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Hendricks said, studying the photographs,
Do you dispute that you engaged in an extramarital affair with Ms. Caldwell while married to the petitioner? Garrett's face flushed crimson. Your Honor, my marriage had been deteriorating for years. My wife was emotionally distant, focused on her volunteer work instead of our relationship. I made a mistake, but a mistake that lasted 8 months and involved company funds used to finance romantic getaways? Rebecca interjected, presenting credit card statements showing charges for jewelry, expensive dinners, and weekend trips that Garrett had hidden from me. Judge Hendricks reviewed the financial records of Garrett's affair, her expression growing more disapproving with each expense report. Mr. Blackwood, you used marital assets to conduct an affair while telling your wife the family couldn't afford your daughter's educational expenses? Your Honor, those charges were minimal compared to our overall financial situation. $47,000 over 8 months is minimal. Judge Hendricks's voice carried disdain. Mr. Blackwood, you spent more money on your mistress than most families earn in a year, while your wife believed you were struggling financially.
The custody evaluation was next, and this was where my careful documentation of Garrett's psychological abuse became crucial. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the court-appointed child psychologist, had interviewed all 3 children extensively and reviewed recordings of Garrett's verbal attacks that I'd captured over the past year. Your Honor, Dr. Walsh testified, the children consistently described their father as unpredictable, prone to angry outbursts, and emotionally unavailable. They expressed fear about disappointing him and anxiety about his reactions to normal childhood mistakes. This pattern suggests a household environment dominated by psychological intimidation. She presented her findings methodically. Lily had developed perfectionist tendencies and anxiety about academic performance because Garrett criticized her grades publicly. Noah had begun lying about minor issues to avoid his father's disproportionate anger. Emma showed signs of emotional regression, including bedwetting and nightmares, that correlated with Garrett's increased hostility toward me. The children consistently identify their mother as their primary source of emotional security and stability, Dr. Walsh continued. They describe her as patient, supportive, and protective. In contrast, they view their father as someone they must perform for rather than someone they can trust with vulnerability. Garrett's attorney attempted to challenge the custody evaluation. Your Honor, Mr. Blackwood has been under extraordinary stress due to his legal troubles. His behavior toward the children shouldn't be judged during this unprecedented crisis. Judge Hendricks looked skeptical. Mr. Webb, these recordings and interviews document behavior patterns spanning several years, not just recent stress responses. Mr. Blackwood's treatment of his family appears to have been problematic long before his criminal charges. The most damaging testimony came from Amber Caldwell herself, who had been subpoenaed to testify about her relationship with Garrett and her knowledge of his business practices. Amber entered the courtroom looking uncomfortable, clearly understanding that her testimony could destroy what remained of Garrett's defense. Ms. Caldwell, Rebecca began, how long were you romantically involved with Mr. Blackwood? About 8 months, Amber replied quietly, not looking at Garrett. During that time, did Mr. Blackwood make statements about his marriage or his wife? Amber hesitated, glancing at Judge Hendricks. He said his wife was boring, that she'd let herself go, that he deserved better than someone who just stayed home all day doing nothing productive. Did he tell you about his plans for divorce? He said he was waiting for his youngest daughter to get older before leaving his wife. He wanted to make sure the divorce settlement wouldn't be too expensive, so he was moving money around to protect his assets so she couldn't claim it in a divorce. Garrett's face went white as his mistress testified about his premeditated plan to defraud me of marital assets. This wasn't spontaneous adultery or temporary marital problems. This was calculated financial abuse designed to leave me impoverished while he started a new life with a younger woman. The final blow came when Rebecca presented evidence of Garrett's attempts to intimidate me during the divorce proceedings.
text messages threatening to fight for custody out of spite, emails claiming he would destroy me financially, voice messages left on my phone at 2 a.m. filled with profanity and personal attacks. Your Honor, Rebecca said, playing one particularly vicious voicemail, Mr. Blackwood has continued his pattern of psychological abuse after being served with temporary restraining orders. Garrett's recorded voice filled the courtroom. You think you're so smart, Lorraine? You think you can humiliate me and get away with it? I'm going to make sure you lose everything. The house, the kids, every penny. You'll be begging in the streets when I'm done with you. Judge Hendricks stopped the recording. Mr. Blackwood, this voicemail was left 2 weeks ago, well after you were served with temporary restraining orders. Do you have any explanation for this behavior? Garrett looked trapped, his attorney clearly unable to explain away such obvious intimidation. Your Honor, I was upset about losing my home and my children. I said things I shouldn't have said. Mr. Blackwood, you threatened to pursue custody not because you want to parent your children, but because you want to punish your wife for exposing your criminal behavior. That's not parental concern, that's continued abuse using your children as weapons. When Judge Hendricks recessed for lunch, I felt cautiously optimistic about our case. The evidence was overwhelming. Garrett's attempts at defense had backfired, and even his own mistress had testified about his plans to defraud me of marital assets. But I knew Garrett's desperation might lead him to make increasingly reckless moves as he realized how completely he was losing. During the lunch break, I called my children to check on them. They were staying with my sister while the hearing took place, sparing them from witnessing their father's public humiliation. Lily answered the phone, her voice carefully controlled. Mom, how's it going? I said, it's difficult, but Judge Hendricks seems to understand the situation clearly. How are you holding up? And she said, I keep thinking about what Aunt Rachel said about how Dad might go to prison. Is that really going to happen? The question broke my heart. Despite everything Garrett had done, he was still their father, and they loved him even while understanding that his behavior was wrong.
I don't know what will happen with the criminal charges, sweetheart. That's separate from our divorce. But whatever happens, you and Noah and Emma are safe, and you'll always have a home with me. After lunch, Judge Hendricks returned to deliver her ruling on temporary orders while the divorce proceeded through final stages. Her decision was swift and comprehensive. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that Mr. Blackwood has engaged in systematic financial fraud, adultery, and psychological abuse throughout this marriage. Temporary custody of the minor children is awarded to Mrs. Blackwood, with supervised visitation for Mr. Blackwood pending completion of anger management counseling. Garrett's jaw dropped as Judge Hendricks continued. Mr. Blackwood is ordered to pay temporary spousal support of $8,000 per month and child support of $3,200 per month. All marital assets remain frozen pending final divorce decree, with Mrs. Blackwood granted exclusive use of the family home. The numbers meant Garrett would be paying me $11,200 monthly while having no access to the assets he'd tried to hide. His financial situation, already devastated by legal fees and frozen accounts, was about to become impossible. Your Honor, Garrett's attorney protested, my client's assets are frozen due to federal charges. He cannot comply with these support orders. Judge Hendricks looked unsympathetic. Mr. Webb, your client's financial difficulties result from his own criminal behavior. Mrs. Blackwood shouldn't suffer additional hardship because her husband chose to commit tax evasion and hide marital assets. As we left the courthouse, Garrett tried one final intimidation attempt. He cornered me near the parking garage, his face twisted with rage and desperation. This isn't over, Lorraine. You think you've won, but I'll appeal everything. I'll fight you for years until you have nothing left. I looked at my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, and felt only pity. He still didn't understand that his threats were empty, that his power over me was permanently broken, that every attempt to intimidate me just created more evidence for future hearings. Garrett, I said calmly that you called me a dull old hag who wasn't worth keeping.
Today, that dull old hag just took your children, your house, your business, and your freedom. Maybe it's time to accept that you never knew who you were married to. Walking to my car, I realized the confrontation phase was complete. Garrett had been publicly exposed, legally defeated, and stripped of the power he'd used to control me for 18 years. But the most satisfying part wasn't his destruction. It was my own transformation, from victim to victor, accomplished through patience, intelligence, and the legal expertise I'd never really abandoned. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as we move toward our final divorce decree. But tonight, I would go home to my children and sleep peacefully in a house where no one would ever humiliate me again. 2 years after that devastating birthday confrontation, I stood in my newly renovated home office reviewing case files for Riverside Legal Aid while watching Emma play in the backyard through my window. The same office where Garrett had once kept his business documents was now filled with my legal briefs, client files, and law books. The transformation was symbolic. This house had become truly mine, a sanctuary instead of a prison. The final divorce decree had come through 18 months ago, awarding me 78% of marital assets, full custody of the children, and substantial monthly alimony that would continue for 10 years. Garrett's federal tax evasion conviction resulted in a 4-year prison sentence, with the first 2 years already served at Morrison Federal Correctional Institution. His early release for good behavior meant he'd be home next spring, though home would be a modest apartment in Riverside Heights, not the mansion he'd lost through his own greed and cruelty. My legal career had flourished beyond my original expectations. The divorce case had demonstrated my litigation skills so effectively that I'd received offers from 3 prestigious law firms. Instead, I'd chosen to become a partner at Riverside Legal Aid, focusing on helping women escape abusive marriages and recover hidden assets from manipulative spouses. My reputation for thorough case preparation and strategic thinking had made me the attorney other lawyers recommended when their clients faced complex domestic abuse situations. The children had adjusted better than I had initially hoped, though the process hadn't been without challenges. Lily, now 18 and preparing for college, had required significant therapy to address her perfectionist anxiety and fear of disappointing authority figures. Her acceptance letter to Crescent Valley University's pre-law program arrived last month, and she told me she wanted to follow my career path, specializing in family advocacy. Mom, you showed me that being smart and patient is better than being loud and mean. I want to help people the way you helped us, she'd said while we celebrated her acceptance. Noah, at 16, had struggled more with anger about his father's behavior, particularly the public humiliation that had affected his social life at school. Sports therapy and counseling had helped him channel his frustration into productive outlets, and his grades had steadily improved once he understood that his father's mistakes weren't his responsibility to bear. Emma, now 10, remembered the least about our old family dynamic, but had thrived in the stable environment I'd created. Her bedwetting and nightmares had stopped within 6 months of Garrett's departure, and her natural cheerfulness had returned. She occasionally asked about visiting her father, but without the desperate need for his approval that had characterized her relationship with him.
The supervised visitation orders had evolved into regular weekend visits as Garrett completed court-mandated anger management and parenting classes. His behavior toward the children had improved dramatically, whether from genuine personal growth or fear of losing visitation rights entirely, I couldn't say. What mattered was that he'd learned to treat them with respect and consistency, rather than the unpredictable emotional manipulation that had defined his previous parenting style. My relationship with Garrett had settled into professional courtesy, focused entirely on co-parenting logistics. He'd stopped the threatening phone calls and intimidation attempts after his first parole hearing, when his attorney explained that continued harassment could affect his early release prospects. Our conversations now consisted of scheduling discussions and school event coordination delivered through a court-approved communication app that documented all exchanges. The financial aftermath of Garrett's downfall had been more extensive than even I'd anticipated.
Blackstone Development had declared bankruptcy 18 months ago, unable to survive the federal investigation and criminal charges. Kevin had managed to salvage some contracts by forming a new company and distancing himself from Garrett's fraudulent practices, but 4 generations of family business legacy had been destroyed by Garrett's greed and dishonesty. Amber Caldwell had left town shortly after testifying in our divorce proceedings, her reputation in Morrison's business community damaged beyond repair by her affair with a married client. I felt no sympathy for her situation. She'd knowingly participated in Garrett's plan to hide assets from his wife while conducting an affair that violated professional ethics. Her consequences, while severe, were direct results of her own choices. The broader community response had been mixed, but generally supportive. Many of Garrett's former friends and business associates had privately reached out to express admiration for my strength in exposing his behavior. Several women had shared their own stories of psychological abuse, thanking me for demonstrating that intelligent response was more effective than passive endurance. However, some members of our social circle had criticized my vindictive approach, suggesting I should have handled the situation more privately to protect the children from public embarrassment. These comments revealed their own complicity in tolerating Garrett's behavior over the years, choosing social harmony over challenging obvious cruelty. "You could have just divorced him quietly," Margaret Thornton had said at a charity function last year. "Did you really need to destroy his entire life so publicly?" My response had been direct. Garrett destroyed his own life through tax evasion, adultery, and financial fraud. I simply revealed crimes that were always going to surface eventually. The only difference is that I refused to be destroyed along with him. The most satisfying development had been my recognition in the legal community for excellence in family law advocacy. Last month, the Morrison County Bar Association had awarded me their Pro Bono Service Award for my work helping domestic abuse victims recover millions of dollars in hidden assets from manipulative spouses. The ceremony took place in the same courthouse where Garrett's divorce and criminal hearings had occurred, a poetic completion of my journey from victim to victor. During my acceptance speech, I'd spoken about the importance of documentation, patience, and strategic thinking in overcoming psychological abuse. Many women believe they're powerless against manipulative partners, I'd said to the audience of attorneys and judges. But powerlessness is often an illusion created by abusers who fear their victims discovering their own strength. Judge Patricia Hendricks, who'd handled our divorce case, approached me after the ceremony. "Lorraine, your case was one of the most thoroughly prepared domestic relations matters I've seen in 30 years on the bench. The way you documented everything while maintaining your composure under psychological pressure was remarkable." The conversation reminded me that my triumph wasn't just personal. It had demonstrated to other abuse victims that intelligent strategy could overcome seemingly impossible situations. My case had become something of a teaching tool in legal circles, showing how comprehensive evidence gathering could expose patterns of manipulation that might otherwise remain hidden. 6 months ago, I'd been contacted by a publisher interested in my story for a book about women who'd successfully escaped abusive marriages. The proposal intrigued me, but I declined, feeling that our family needed more privacy before sharing our story publicly. Perhaps in a few years, when the children were older and Garrett's legal troubles were completely resolved. My personal life had evolved cautiously but positively. Dating seemed premature while the children were still adjusting to their new family structure, but I'd developed close friendships with colleagues at Riverside Legal Aid and other attorneys who respected my work. The isolation I'd felt during my marriage, cut off from meaningful professional relationships by Garrett's demands, had been replaced by a supportive community of people who valued my contributions. Last week, Garrett had requested a meeting to discuss Noah's upcoming driver's education classes. We'd met at a neutral location, a coffee shop near the courthouse, where our conversation remained focused on practical parenting logistics. Garrett looked different, thinner, more thoughtful, lacking the aggressive confidence that once defined his personality. "Lorraine," he said as we concluded our discussion, "I know this might not mean much coming from me, but I want you to know I understand now how wrong I was, not just about the financial stuff, but about how I treated you for all those years."
I appreciate you saying that, Garrett. What matters now is that you continue being a good father to our children. I will, he'd promised. It's literally the only thing I have left that matters. The conversation had been cordial, but not warm. Forgiveness might come eventually, but trust would never be restored. Too much damage had been done, too many lies told, too many years of psychological manipulation endured. Garrett would remain the father of my children, and nothing more. That evening, as I'd tucked Emma into bed in her cheerfully decorated bedroom, walls painted her favorite shade of purple, bookshelves filled with stories about brave girls having adventures, she asked me a question that summarized everything I'd learned. "Mom, are you happy now that Dad doesn't live here anymore?" I considered the question carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer that didn't damage her relationship with her father. "I'm happy that our house is peaceful now, sweetheart. I'm happy that nobody yells or says mean things anymore. And I'm happy that you and Lily and Noah feel safe and loved every day." "Me too," Emma had said, hugging her stuffed rabbit. "I like it better when everyone is nice to each other." Standing now in my office, reviewing files for tomorrow's client meetings, I reflected on the journey from that devastating birthday confrontation to this moment of quiet satisfaction. The woman Garrett had called a dull old hag had reclaimed her identity as a brilliant attorney, loving mother, and fierce advocate for justice. The most profound lesson hadn't been about revenge or even justice. It had been about reclaiming power I'd never actually lost, only forgotten I possessed. Garrett's abuse had been designed to make me believe I was helpless, worthless, dependent on his approval for my sense of self-worth. Breaking free from that psychological prison had required recognizing that his opinion of me was irrelevant to my actual value and capabilities. My children would grow up understanding that respect must be earned through consistent, decent behavior, not demanded through intimidation or manipulation. They'd learn that actions have consequences, that intelligence and patience triumph over cruelty and arrogance, and that sometimes the strongest response to bullying is strategic documentation followed by systematic justice. The house felt truly peaceful as I prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to help other women find their strength and reclaim their power. The dull old hag Garrett had tried to discard had become the successful attorney, devoted mother, and respected advocate I was always meant to be. Justice hadn't been about destroying Garrett. It had been about refusing to let him destroy me. And in the end, that made all the difference.